Chapter 41 Dungeon Raid 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bathed in the moonlight was an art of bloody battlefield worth a corner in the most prestigious and renowned art gallery in the entire world. A war between monsters and humans. Where humans defended their empire and ravaged the monsters with everything they've got. Just like the brilliant Red Prince predicted, bombing the mountain caused massive tremors that sent the monsters packing. They poured out of the caves in full force. From the beginning, they were going for a full frontal assault. The only miscalculation was they might have looked down on the numbers of this monster, and as if that wasn't enough, the monsters expressed tremendous strength. For example, just a common one could slam a human on his head and the force of that attack will smash the human's head onto the ground. Their fists broke shields. Their claws cut deeper than a breakup. But the humans still put up with it regardless. Fighting. And fighting. The monsters were defined by fangs, claws, furs, and howling. Right, anyone would have thought they were wolves, but seeing their size and strength annulled this thought pattern. Although they were four-legged, their size was enormous. The least tallest of them was standing head to head with a soldier, with its teeth gnarling with drool into his eyes. And the tallest of them would need about 5 soldiers to climb themselves for them to see eye to eye. And there were several of those. The fight was tough, but there were some people that made it appear easy and gave the soldiers hope and motivation to fight stronger despite the dreadful circumstance. On this side of the battlefield, a black streak like lightning swarmed through the huge wolves, revealing a young man as it came to a zapping stop. From behind went an explosion like fireworks following the streaks and wreaking havoc on the crowd. An explosive attack was the right call, with the monster's height and strength the way to go about this was dealing damage in numbers and leaving the rest to the lower fries that were following him from behind. And Curtis Delgado could be considered a well-do hero because of his evaluation of this fact and execution of actions in a split minute. His face gave the first impression of a strong and intelligent man, and his personality didn't sway away from that fact, at least battle-wise. Curtis was a fine swordsman. From his childhood, he was able to master the counter-step. When he was 10 years old, by the time he was due to become a hero, he had mastered all the family's martial art and was already even tuning it to meet his style. That is after all how martial art and skills are structured. Now, let's not forget that martial art in the rut was created based on the capabilities of a hero, which meant that a hero's difference was taken into consideration. From the first user to the next user, the martial arts as it is being passed down is being refined and evolved by the hero's nature and capabilities, just like how Curtis added his style to it. When passing it to another, the martial art in the hands of that hero will be fine-tuned and evolved. Now it could be an evolution forward. Or an evolution backward. It is all based on the user's intellect. Amber Rose couldn't help but admit to his strength as she saw him zap around with black lightning and explosives. She was the kind of person that always acknowledged strength, even though she was way stronger. Amber Rose was equipped with a round shield and a great sword. From the view of a battle expert, it was a bad combination, but that was her style. And it had its beauty. Tremors and flying bodies of wolves painted the scene around her, with immense speed and body control, dodging improperly, not being flustered by a sudden change in the attack pattern of the monsters. Her round shield projected a larger blue transparent shield that ejected the wolves closer to them and sent them flying away. While her sword cleaning swung into the ones that were able to withstand the deflection, taking advantage of the split moment to drive her sword into them before they recover. Her attacks had a pattern but were not stereotypical. The monsters had an outstanding wit for adaptation. Looks like the unblazing sun is no joke. From a distant side of the battlefield was yet another charming and beautiful rapier that delved a thorn of purple roses into the bodies of monsters, leaving them to the arrogant hands of petrification with the blood that run through their veins willingly searing till their entire body shatters like stone. Fiona Graham's in terms of beauty would lose to Amber Rose, but just so you know she wasn't far off. It just was that the unblazing sun is perfect in every fold, even though she doesn't mean to most of the time. One would call it a trait that runs in the family, just like her father, a humble and warm man. he would often mix with the lower class, and his stand in the society would make anyone doubt his family as one of the 3 strongest families in the Pomei Empire. Fiona Grahams has lived her life having to chase the back of her mother until when she started to make her mark in the world and she had to leave home to achieve that. To not be covered under the shadow of her mother's achievement. But entering the world, she meets powerful comrades who have a more devastating backstory than her, who have had to face more harsh reality than she can ever imagine. Which is why she thinks of Amber Rose as a little girl who knows nothing. Of course, she wouldn't deny the potency of her skill. Maybe that is why her eyes were so glued on the pretty girl even though they were so far away from each other. Chapter 42 Dungeon Raid 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. How many near-death situations has it been now? 7, 13, 21, 44. Every time, Wraith escaped in the nick of the beast's claws, and no matter how fast he is, he couldn't measure up to the ferocious speed of this monster that disappeared and appeared in front of him. Well, not that the monster is a teleporter, its movement was just faster than Wraith's eyes could follow. And what was more devastating was that Wraith couldn't see any attack patterns. When the claws of the monster slashed him from behind, he rolled forward, tumbling and crashing his head over and over as he rolled like a ball. His coat was ripped in several places, and all those places carried a pattern of blood with them. Which meant every of the panther's strikes slit Wraith's skin. Sometimes not too deep. But Wraith was reaching the end of his lifeline. And trust me, the beast was enjoying this. It sternly darted its red glowing eyes into Wraith's helpless state. When it just arrived, it didn't even stop at one place but kept running and running. That rate it couldn't pin it to one location, and that was how it endlessly dealt with him, running and slashing him, not giving him a chance to react or even touch. But now the monster was standing in front of Wraith, who was holding his shoulder. His muscles there had been badly slashed, and his ribs area, his thighs, and even his leg were shivering. All those endless running when he was dealing with the mob panthers was already dealing a toll on his leg. His breathing was becoming more irregular, and he didn't need to be told that he was hitting fatigue. Although the voice still took out the privilege to tell him. Stamina. 03, your stamina is incredibly low, you are fatigued. All the letters that displayed this message in front of him were in bold red. Wraith took his time staring down at the monster, who gnarled at him in response. He smiled again. I sometimes forget I can't die. A sense of comfort entered his heart as he remembered. Spending months climbing down a mountain because he didn't want to lose his life had completely programmed in his head that he could lose it. But as the situation was looking like Wraith was going to die and he began to think of farewells, he remembers, he hadn't occupied himself with the thought of dying every time just because he can wake up. In fact, he never wants anything to get down to that part. But looks like this one is inevitable. His head followed the trajectory of the monster as it leaped into the air and came upon him. Everything tumbled in a rush and turned black instantly, but the tearing and stinging pain all over his body still lingered for a few more minutes before he finally lost touch of his consciousness. You have died. Devourer has been subconsciously activated. You have the tendency to devour something. When a target is within range, it will be devoured completely. His entire body turned into a black liquid mass with shark teeth and wrapped the monster before it had the chance to leap back. The teeth slowly dug into the monster's skin and the black mass tightened, slowly squeezing the monster into smaller sizes until nothing was left of it. Then the black liquid mass reverted to the young man lying on the ground, naked. You have defeated the monster boss. The abyss is impressed by your potential. The darkness within you has increased. Shadow energy. 50. You have absorbed the monster's core using perk, Devourer. You will not gain any energy. You have gained a new skill. The soul of the monster has been transformed into a shadow ego. Shadow ego will be deleted and converted into stats because perk, Shadow Lord, is locked. You have gained 24 stat points. You have gained 2 new skills. The abyss has acknowledged. The abyss has given you a new feature. You can now level up. When you reach certain levels, some locked perks and undisplayed perks will be revealed. You will reach first class advancement when you reach level 100, hero status, name. Unknown class. Child of Death age. 001 level. 001 aura points. 00 cosmotic energy. 130 shadow energy, locked. 61 title. Celestia Slayer, one who devours death, chosen by the claws of failure, destined for damnation, I do not fear death. Traits. The darkness beyond death, the dissatisfaction failure brings, Shadow Lord, locked, perks. Devourer, EX, LV4. Transcendent Sense, S, LV13. Intimidation, S, LV8. Heat Resistance, S, LV2. Skill. Truth Seeker, S, LV1. Lava Ration, A, LV5. Instant Move, B, LV1. Air Leap, C, LV1. Black Armor, D, LV1, Stat, Strength. 44 Agility. 38 Vitality. 40 Intelligence. 130 Endurance. 79 Will. 12 available stat points. 30 for the night and hollowed atmosphere were serene even as they once again seeped into his sight. Wraith looked around as he rose. Did it go? The entire place was silent, but Roth could still tell the gazes from behind the tree, but something was different about them. He looked down at the message that stared at him. You have defeated the dungeon owner. Dungeon will close in 00.59.58. I really defeated the owner. That is absurd, he mutters to himself, but what else would describe this situation where the panthers lurked around but none of them dared to move closer. He bowed his head and noted another thing that was different about him. He must have been incredibly foolish not to notice it until now. He immediately guarded his third leg, shielding it from the glowing eyes of these black animals while he tiptoed away, finding his way out of the dungeon. They had lost track of the time of entry into this dungeon. Everon Blaze, Wash the fire in Prince Andre's hand rose like the wind, spreading like a raging tsunami around him, burning monsters and provoking them to insanity. The numbers of their soldiers had run down, and the battle was coming to an end. The battlefield was scanty, and the corpse of monsters and humans decorated the ground. And as Prince Andres saw this scene, sorrow gripped his heart and rage consumed his face. His fire rose in accordance with his emotion, kabooming into the sky and spreading like a tree. All he wanted was for the dungeon boss to come out, but it was as if the bastard didn't exist. In a normal dungeon, the brutal killing of a dungeon boss monsters would have pushed the boss to show itself and kill all the humans present, but this dungeon boss was not even acting as if he existed. But at the very least the heroes were hopeful. They could see this fight was coming to an end, and although they had to sacrifice a lot of lives, they were also coming closer to the end. The Empire soldiers, no matter how bloodied and tired they were, they pushed through the ground, while their general flung around the prince like a butterfly, having his back every single moment. Your Highness, his back kissed the prince's back again, and both of them had their arms arched up, with two swords in the commander's hand and the prince's fist consumed by a raging fire. I know, the prince responded. He didn't look at General Asbury, but their expressions said the same thing. Prince Andres clicked his tongue in frustration and gritted his teeth, his eyeball quivered as he turned his eyes around to see the sorry state of the soldiers. We need to retreat. He knew that much, but just when he thought the situation will permit it. A howl went into the sky, and immediately, all of them could see the moon move from directly above them to behind the cave, bathing the humanoid figure in its illumination. The silhouette of the monster could be seen with two digitigrade legs, hands, and a prolonged mouth that was raised. Several other silhouettes began to climb up the cave and show themselves in the likeness of this same animal. The monsters they were previously engaging all bowed, irresponsible of whether they were on the losing or winning side at that moment. This made the heroes realize this fight was just about to begin. Chapter 43 When Victory Sounds Like a Loss. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A lot of new things had come into play in a very short time for Wraith. Some things even the Abyss could not understand. Perhaps what really needed questioning was the origin of that perk, Devourer, but certain things are better left for the tongue of the future to give an explanation to. Besides, trouble lurked around the gate as law enforcers of the lower realms surrounded the gate, unable to enter because it was locked immediately after Wraith entered. They awaited whatever was in it, paying no heed to Volmak, who tried to amicably reason with them. Plus, their commander holds a grudge, and he held a very bad one against Volmak, who was praised as the strongest general when they were just mates. He believes Volmak just got lucky to be scouted by a demon lord. He refuses to see or accept the hard work that Volmak has put into his strength. All that, he refuses to acknowledge and always beef Volmak at every slight chance he gets. He originally wouldn't be here, but when he heard the gate was not too far from Volmak's cabin, how could he miss this opportunity to oppress Volmak with his authority once again? But Volmak didn't mind. He honestly pleaded, at the same time patiently waiting for what was going to come out of the dungeon. One thing was sure. If Wraith comes out, both of them are going to be arrested. Him, for shielding a human, Wraith for being a human and being in Felfium. He sighed. He was tired of pleading, so he just cut himself some slack. Zap. The attitude of the game thus far has been consistent and stable until this 2 seconds ago. It suddenly began to throw sparks and draw wind again. Their shoulders, which were already getting relaxed, suddenly got tensed again. They were all heavily cladded in the same metal, seemingly scraps but with red patterns, and it was the same with all of them. They pointed their spears to the gate. And as Wraith's leg came out of the gate, they surrounded the gate and restricted his movement with their closure on him. What is going on? What did I do? Did someone rat me out? Was probably what rummaged his mind as the law enforcers forced him to his knee, treating him like he had just committed an act of violence. Oh, isn't this a Nebraska?" their commander said, rubbing the antenna that was situated right above his lips and would have served as a mustache if he was human. As he rubbed the slimy antennas, they rolled around his hand. "Volmak has brought home a Nebraska." "Huh, how impressive." The man laughed as if the revelation of what he was saying had just been dawned on him. He flung his face to Volmak and grinned. "Looks like you will be going with me to the Dark Castle, and you, my friend, will be going in chains. Both of you," he said, swinging his fingers in between Wraith and Volmak. Without waiting for his direct command, the soldiers that were free slipped chains into Wraith's hand and legs and did the same thing with Volmak, who said nothing and just pushed his hands forward, making it easy for them to chain him. The only thing that worried Wraith was how much trouble he might have caused for the old man, and it could be seen on his face as his eyes stayed on Volmak with his brows drifting upwards. Cover this human with some rag or something, that ungodly thing in between his legs keeps annoying me." The commander yelped and turned away, resting his hand on his sword that was hung on his belt. They marched forward with both of them amongst the soldiers. For the first, it was sad, but for the first time that Wraith would see the city, it had to be in chains, and when he was arrested. It was hard to call it the lower realm of hell. Contrary to how uncivilized and rural Wraith thought it would be, even though the city was built in the middle of a black desert, it was a true and modest display of wonder. Its grace is matched by the backdrop of pristine black skies which have helped shape the city into what it is. The climate these skies brought was of great importance, but they were also influential when it came to architectural designs, as the vast majority of buildings were designed to take full advantage of the climate, as more daring elements can be created when you don't have to worry about strong rains. The skyline is crowded with distinct shapes of houses, but they all had in common the fact that they were wooden except for the castle that stood far ahead on the fjord that lay ahead of the city. There were signs of construction which indicated that more buildings seemed to be on their way. The culture in this place is unique. Most of them were cladded in fine armor, some leather armor, and many of them wore casual dresses like they were in medieval times. The different structures and look of their body was a huge factor that played in the difference of their culture. Wraith had looked forward to seeing them, and now that he was seeing them living their normal life in their fiendish forms, it created a sense of beauty for Wraith, who kept looking as he was dragged forward. But they could be seen with odd accessories like shades, wristwatches, and sneakers, which made the oddity stand out, and it has attracted a lot of attention. This culture has left its mark not just on trade and relations, but also on the city's identity. What historically was a city of little contrast has grown into an amalgamation of differences, and it's this that unites the 1.7 million fiends to this day. Several cafes, food carts, and clubs offer a plethora of culinary and entertainment choices, and those who feel hungry for something else can enjoy dance, musical activities, arcades, or one of the many other recreational venues. Before long the city was out of sight and all the sightseeing Wraith could do had come to the end. And as they scaled the mountain where an ominous castle stood, Wraith gulped and anticipated what was about to come to him. "Don't worry, it will be fine," he heard, and his gaze stayed upon Volmek's large back that slowly moved higher as they scaled up the mountain. The nations fear a true disaster as news of the Empire spread across the world of the rut. People's eyes were glued on live news that showed the heroes coming out covered in injuries and the corpse of the general that was brought out. This fear was not because the Empire was defeated. The Empire very much won this war, but it was because of the number and state of people that made it alive. The number of heroes plus the Empire soldiers that entered the dungeon was around 3,000, when other nations were seeing this, they thought it was an assured victory. The Empire had the power of numbers, and they even had strong heroes who went into the dungeon with them. Yet these strong heroes came out with grave injuries. Even Amber Rose had what looked like a claw scratch on her right arm. Her armor and shield has been smashed, and the only thing that looked unscathed was the silver boot she was wearing. Curtis didn't have any major injuries too, but he was out cold, yes. He passed out the moment they stepped out of the gate. Other heroes had claw marks delved into the stomach. Ethan O'Brien had 3 clawed scratches over his chest and could barely stand. They all were transported to the hospital, but this occurrence began to call people to question the silence of the pontifices. Is this the end of the world? Is this it for us? Why are the pontifices not saying anything? Is this even the right time to be sleeping? Be Noel dem, or are we being lied to? Are the archons dead too? People began to question the state of the archons, and in some nations where their masses were drastic like Alien United, the masses began to cause destruction and wreck branch temples. On the other side of the world, the Elemental Guild successfully defeated one dungeon but was paid an enormous amount for it. Led by Thaw Sonata, the guild began to slowly make its mark in the world, and as other nations heard of their victory, they began to reach out, ready to pay whatever amount they mentioned. The report of the Empire's win that looked like a defeat was like a business promotion for Thaw Sonata, whom even the stubborn Rigeria nation had reached out to, willing to pay the outrageous amount he offered to them. He truly felt like this was a great time to be alive. Chapter 44 Fenrir 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wrath was immediately passed to an oubliette and immediately entered the castle. Volmek, however, was taken somewhere else, and Wraith had no idea where. He just stayed in the prison, silent and waiting on the time a soldier was probably going to take him out, but it seemed like forever. His eyes were getting used to the darkness, and in a little time, he was beginning to think he was blind. 1 week passed. 2 weeks, 3. 4. 5. On the 6th. You have devoured the night, you have gained a new perk, dark vision. How? As Wraith questioned this unlikely phenomenon, his sight went from feeling blind to being able to navigate through the darkness. It felt like when he opened his eyes after closing them for a while in the place of prayer to a deity, everything felt renewed and refreshed, but there was still no light. Which furtherly confused him. Even in this darkness, he could tell apart all 4 corners of the cell, the bones that were already decaying in one corner. The one that fascinated him the most was one that was chained by the corner of the wall. It was intact with a robe that had fallen off. The skeleton was complete, although a part of the skull seems to be broken, and the features. Wraith could undoubtedly tell that this was the body of a human. It's fascinating and scary. He was alone. Was he going to end up like this? He had no idea how much time had passed, but he feared for himself. His dream of surpassing his father and brother, proving the world wrong, becoming the strongest, was all that going to be for naught? And he would just die in some cell because no one even remembered him. There was one person. He was so sorry for the trouble he must have caused the old man. His eyes rolled down as he fanned himself with memories of his times with the old man. He had gotten to know the sweet and kind side of Volmak over the months, although the man is undoubtedly ferocious and wicked. He could tell by his demeanor sometimes when he comes back from the city in a nasty mood. But even in that time, Volmak would still be nice to him and would never even ask him to do the chores, or nag him for waking up late. It felt like he was living in a palace even though it was a small cabin. His only bad days were days Absalom would come to show off his strength. Volmak was Absalom's teacher and Wraith wanted the same, but for some reason Volmak would not agree, claiming that he would not dare to teach Wraith anything. At some point, Wraith just had to give up. Absalom was talented in many ways. Wraith desired his strength and often challenged him to a duel, but the young vampire was too proud. "I will die than to fight with a measly roach like you." His words always stung Wraith, and because of the stubbornness of these two, Wraith's growth had stayed the same. The only thing he was able to improve on was figuring out the use of his perks. He spent his time associating himself with his perks since he couldn't do anything. But to be able to devour an entire being was not within Wraith's discovery. Even now he questions how exactly he was able to defeat the dungeon boss. Wraith opened his hands and stared down at his palm. The tendency to devour anything. Saying it out loud, he realizes it sounded as though the perk description was trying to tell him that there was nothing he wouldn't be able to devour. A thought like a quick snap crosses Wraith's mind. If so, would I be able to devour the abyss? Nah, I mean since the abyss gave me this perk, it is logically impossible. Wraith smirked and growled, huh? Right, I haven't eaten. Wraith touched his stomach and could feel it sink in. But right now, there was nothing he could do. He checked around if there could be some 1,000 or 100 or 10 years of scrubbed food that was probably left by one of the bones that had decayed. Close to the skeleton that was complete, he found a paper. But shifted his hand, grazing through the rest of the floor where he found a black apple. Black. That apple has been there for ages, God knows what it is. But Wraith grabbed it and took the paper so he could entertain himself with whatever it is while he ate the apple. He sat back and crossed his legs. Upon holding the apple, its water began to squeeze out. He didn't even apply much pressure on it. Well, whatever, he says and begins to eat while he looks at the book. They were not letters that he was taught or should understand, but he understood them very well. His eyes turned from glancing through to getting interested and finally to fixated upon until he had eaten the apple till at last. Wraith didn't care about the taste of this fruit, he just wanted to eat it. He needed food and anything works fine since he cannot die. Even after he was done with the apple, he still didn't take his eyes off this paper. How in the world is a treasure like this in here? Wraith gaped, still looking into the book and muttering. 1,000 Ways of Sagacity. The paper was just a torn part of a tome. Perhaps that was the reason why Wraith could not completely understand it, with how hard he tried. The beginning part of the book had written on it white aura, but it was written in such a way that there seemed to be a previous discussion about this white aura, and the contents spoke about mastering a particular way that can create an opening to several ways so long the mind is at stability. But first, there was a scripture to master, a meditation to incorporate, and it will take time because the body and mind have to be one. Yes, Wraith got all that part, and even with what he read alone, this 1,000 Ways of Sagacity was sounding very interesting, but the few lines that existed downwards he could not understand. They seemed to be the beginning of the explanation, but it was complex. You have consumed a large amount of poison, your health is in danger. Oh shit, Wraith mumbled with a chuckle. It was as if life had become a joke to him. Oh, I'm gonna die, I'm so scared, or being in a dark cell alone had brought him to team up with Crazy. You weird. He held his stomach as the pain started, opening his mouth and trying to force out whatever it was that was threatening his life. But it was to no avail. He continued to fight it but groaned endlessly till he fell on the ground with the paper he was reading beside him, foaming, his eyeballs rolled out of his eyes and his heart race slowed down. With his hand on his stomach, he stayed there. You have died, you have the tendency to devour something, GRZZTTTT #% the black holographic tab in front of him glitches as if it was trying to take away the next message. But regardless of all this, Wraith's body turned into a mass of black liquid, absorbing everything that was in that cell. Paper, bones, even the skeleton. You have consumed the part of a certain tome using Devourer, the skill of the tome has been extracted, you have gained a new skill, you have gained 11 stats by consuming the bodies around you, and Shadow Ego has been created, Devourer has created a sub-perk, Stomach, you can save Ego Soul inside, Stomach, R, LV1. 0/3, perk, Poison Resistance has been created, the metal door screeched as it was opened from outside without any prior notice, as the soldier entered the dungeon, he found Wraith laying on the ground, lifeless. Immediately, the soldier ran back to the commander to report this. Ha! He spent just a few weeks and he's dead already, LO, my lord, what shall we do? Feed him to Fenrir, the soldier froze as if his eyes had beheld an impossible horror. His eyes were quivering and he could barely take them off the commander who didn't care about his opinion about the command he just gave. Are you deaf? The commander yelled at him, causing him to run outside falling and picking himself back up till he was out of the door. The commander looked like he didn't care when the soldier was around, but immediately after, he slammed his hand on the metal table that was scattered with old, brown papers. He gritted his teeth as the antennas that were situated as whiskers wiggled. His monolith eyes glared into nothing, and even though they were wrinkled in a way that expressed anger and frustration, there was no brow to accompany them. He looked like he had just gotten in trouble. Chapter 45 Fenrir, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. The Fenrir was a horror that shouldn't belong to the lower realm. Every fiend knows the legend of that creature. Just like the demons, the Fenrir was a fiend that was birthed within the abyss and was the only one left in the abyss even after the demons were expunged. But after several years, the Fenrir suddenly came out of the abyss of its own will, wishing to be united with its brothers and sisters. But was rejected due to jealousy. It was no news that the abyss preferred Fenrir to the others, maybe it was due to his nature as a wolf. A big white wolf that when he stood on all fours, his back almost touching the sky. But when the demons sought to kill Fenrir, he began to harbor hatred for everything that the abyss has ever created. This hatred prevented it from going into the abyss. And the Fenrir turned from the abyss best creation to the abyss worst creation. His furs turned black and his eyes, which used to seek love, began to exude hatred. Wraith's body toppled as it was carelessly dropped from the top of the dungeon. The body journeyed all the way from the top to the underground, which was over 20 feet. The toppling sound, which was accompanied by the sound of his bones breaking and limbs twisting, made the Fenrir's red fiery eyes open. It gazed at the new entrant and growled with its lowest octave, but still trembled the stones on the ground. Ba.dump. Wraith's heart resumed breathing and his eyes opened. Instantly he arched up his back and sat up. Looking at the messages he received as he died. He couldn't help but notice that it took time for him to wake up this time again. And his body consumed everything that was around him because Devourer activated the moment he died. What is going on with this perk? Wraith mumbled as he opened the perk information of Devourer. Devourer, EX, LV1. You have the tendency to devour something. If you die in certain states, the perk will automatically be activated. Due to the effect of the Shadow Lord attribute, the perk has been amplified. Sub.perk, Stomach, R, LV1. This perk was created by the effect of Shadow Lord attributes. You can store Shadow Egos. Slot 03. Stored Egos 01. Wraith rubbed his chin. I didn't notice it before, but all the skills have level now. I can level up. By implication of meaning alone, it seems this means I can rise in number. But I have never heard this of any hero. Why are things I have never heard of happening to me? Wraith's question was answered by a low growl that catapulted goosebumps all through his skin. Wraith's head flung towards his side where that red fiery eye was, staring at him with patience and exuding hatred. And you have sensed an incredible amount of murderous intent, yes. Roargh. The big bad wolf let out a grandiose hoot that shook the underground and even reached the top. The floor vibrated and the soldiers took it for a good sign and proceeded to their post, laughing away. Gulp. Wraith swallowed his spit after he was almost swept away by the breeze of the Fenrir's roar. The creature stood up and its height kept rising before Wraith's eyes till Wraith had to look up for their eyes to meet. Trial of the Shadow Lord. You are on the path to becoming chosen of the Abyss. With certain anomalies, the Abyss has thought of speeding things up and unlocking the attribute of the Shadow Lord. The Fenrir is the Abyss's best creature. However, the creature has lost his value and now seeks and breeds hatred. Defeat the Fenrir and make it your first shadow summon. Quest reward. Title: Shadow Lord. Oh great! Just great! Wraith lamented as the Abyss made things worse for him. And what the hell does he mean by due to certain anomalies? Grrrghhh. The Fenrir's forelimbs drifted through the ground, smacking Wraith and smashing him onto the wall of the underground. His body fell to the ground. The Fenrir paused and looked down. A portion of its feet was already melting. Using his claws he quickly cut that part and was left with 3 limbs, but that was not a limitation. Before Wraith could move, the Fenrir smashed its body into where Wraith's body was, crushing everything. You have died, level up, you have gained 4 stats points. The Fenrir retreated and sat on the ground, licking the leg he had previously cut. Bit by bit the leg began to grow until it was whole again. He then rested his head on his crossed forelimbs, thinking the fight had come to a quick end. But the stones that crumbled on Wraith's body began to move. Wraith flung up. It seems the skill didn't activate this time. I was expecting it to activate though. Wraith opened his palm. Let's do this. He shouted. You are using skill air leap. His body lunged into the air, projecting him to the top of the surprised Fenrir. He landed on its fur and the Fenrir began a sudden dance. Shaking and flipping, trying to shake Wraith off its back. Wraith held on tight, resisting and enduring the turmoil that came with this rough ride, the dizziness, the instability, the turning of his stomach that was very hungry, all sorts, but Wraith stayed through to the end. The Fenrir, finally seeing that Wraith was still there, ran into a wall and smashed his back on the wall. Moments before his body smashed the wall. You are using skill, instant move, your speed will increase by 10%, Wraith shifted forward in a jiffy, grabbing the Fenrir's neck fur and holding on tightly as the Fenrir smashed itself on the wall repeatedly. Breaking and crashing the wall over and over again. The entire castle was beginning to feel the impact because the cave that housed Fenrir was where this castle was built upon. The darkness might mistake anyone to thinking the cave was small and tight for the Fenrir, but the cave was very big because it needed to accommodate the Fenrir's size. So, it was incredibly big. And it was the demons' plan to dispose of him and take him away from their sight. While he has been buried in the lower realms for thousands of years, they have built Felfium and made it a world that could rival that of the humans in terms of civilization and growth. The Fenrir jumped and flipped his body, slamming his whole back to the ground and causing a tremor that began to sink the walls and lower grounds of the castle. Fiends that were maids and servants began to run around as an earthquake suddenly broke out in rooms and grounds. What is going on? The castle lord cried as he stormed out of his room, having felt the tremor. The commander immediately met him before he reached the end of the hallway. Sir, we fed the Fenrir. You fed the Fenrir? He asked, pausing and looking back at the commander whose explanation wasn't adding up. Yes, the food must have tasted bad. The castle lord lifted one of his eyebrows and looked down at the commander. Aside from a broken horn that sat in the middle of his head, the man's features were just like a human's except for his glittering complexion and scales instead of skin. This is not the first time that the Fenrir has been fed, so why is it making a fuss? The tone of his voice demanded immediate answers, but the commander couldn't provide any. He just stuttered and said what he knew. It was, it was the human Volmak brought. Volmak. Human. Why did I not hear of this? The Lord asked, turning back fully to face the commander. Who kept his head bowed? He died before we could bring him to your front. And Volmak? He is being held in a comfortable cell. Whether it is comfortable or not. Why is Volmak being held in a cell? If it is Volmak, why didn't you bring him to me immediately? The Lord's voice rose again and made the commander bow his head further below. I am so sorry, I shall bring him to you now. No. I will go and see him. Take me to him. He demanded. The commander's eyes widened. Shit, Volmak is not in a comfortable cell. What do I do? His mind screamed and searched for answers as he led the Lord in silence, but he found none. All he could do was squirm in the sorrow of how much trouble he is in today and furtherly nurture his hatred towards Volmak. That damn Volmak, this is because of him. Shit 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 shit. He cried as the walls and floors of the castle trembled even harder. They got to the cell where Volmak was and it was empty. The iron bars of the cell looked like someone tore them apart with pure strength. The Lord looked into the cell and could see the bones of prisoners who had died inside this place. He very much knew that this was the lowest level of cell, and criminals that were brought here always end up forgotten and would die of hunger and would even rot away and still not be remembered. He looked at the commander. Come here, maggot. Chapter 46 Fenrir, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Come here, you fool, the commander slowly and bowing his head, moved closer to the lord of the castle. Raise your head. My lord, the commander said as he raised his face slightly to look at the lord. Slap. His face swung sideways as the lord's sharp claws slashed his cheek. The commander immediately bowed his head again, not having a second to cry as purple blood dripped down his cheek. Raise your damn head, he shakily obeyed the lord's order. Slap. The second slap was intense and louder than the first. The commander's face swung to the side and his body followed. He stayed on his knee to regain his senses but hurriedly kowtowed as the Lord began to speak. Find me Volmak and find out what is wrong with the Fenrir before I change my mind and kill you on spot. The Lord's red eyes exuded murderous intent that made the soldiers behind him shudder and shrink, wishing they could just disappear. Yes, sir. The commander shouted and immediately rose. He ran forward, but forward only leads deeper into the cell lair. He soon came back running and bowed swiftly in front of the Lord, who stayed there and watched him. He ran outside after bowing. You are using skill, Lavaration, you are using skill, Lavaration, you are using skill, Lavaration. Wraith, when he first received this skill, thought it was all he needed. All he needed to do when facing a monster was touch it and its death was assured. He was sure that the battle going forward was going to be an easy one, and all he needed to hone was his movement and speed. But never has he thought that there would be a time when the skill would be so useless. No matter how many times he kept using the skill, the melt did not spread and immediately evaporated, and this came on. The target has developed a resistance to burn and melt. Fucking wham. The Fenrir made a sudden sharp turn that flung Wraith off his back, slamming against the wall. His body flattened on the floor, and as he tried to get up he spewed blood, falling back to the ground but stopping midway with the support of his elbow. His lower lip was bathed in blood and the Fenrir was just starting with him. Dilviko, as the Fenrir sprinted towards him, terrorizing the ground with every step of heaviness, Wraith blurred forward, with a splitting image that disappeared and appeared in between the legs of the wolf. It worked with the leg before. Maybe the leg is the weak point. Wraith touched Fenrir's forelimb from behind. The skill activated and began to erode, birthing a wide smile that soon faded away on Wraith's face. The target has developed a resistance to burn and melt. Wham. The Fenrir slapped him away with its leg. Wraith's body immediately slammed, the upper wall fell back to the ground and bounced on before finally coming to a helpless stop. Wraith was covered in blood and his right leg was twisted in the wrong direction. His eyes stayed open as blood dripped down his face and the vision of the Fenrir that drew nigh got blurry. "That I need a weapon," Wraith mumbled, still looking at the monster that was now in front of him. The total area his eyes could capture did not include the head of the Fenrir due to his height, so Wraith was about to tilt his head upward to see the look on the Fenrir's face, but his head got smashed before his gaze could reach up. "You have died, level up. You have gained 4 stats." The Fenrir's leg stayed on him for a few more minutes with his fangs gnarling at Wraith's corpse before it finally turned and walked away from the dead boy to continue its rest, even though the surface was quaking because of its fiery fight. "Voice of the world or whatever you are. Show me my stats," Wraith demanded, having woken up. Stats: Strength. 44 Agility. 38 Stamina. 40 Intelligence. 130 Endurance. 79 Will. 12 available stat points. 53, I still have like 50.3 free stat points. Am I crazy or what? Wraith inquired of himself, having woken up from his brief slumber and still pretending to be dead while he prepared for this round of the fight. 30 points to strength. 30 points have been added to strength stat. Wraith evidently felt the bulging throughout his body as he increased his strength stat. There was a subtle pain that soared through his body as he felt his muscles increase in density and tightened, slowly reflecting on his arms and body in general. 10 to speed. 10 points have been added to speed stat. The same thing happened but was more subtle and almost unnoticed. Wraith stood up and tore the dirty cloak that was covering him, stripping himself naked in front of the monster that now raised its head with a fuming glare. His body had become incredibly formed, his chest broader, his abs better chiseled and thickened, and his side ridges were visible even when wasn't trying to take a look. The Fenrir got up again, this time not even wasting a second. It dashed, walloping its huge body into Wraith, but all that came to a sudden halt. The Fenrir displayed a brief show of surprise and put more force on his feet. But all the best that could do was push Wraith forward a bit. 10 points to vitality, remaining 3 to strength. Wraith's strength stat at 71 was not enough to put an easy stop to Fenrir's push, but the two seemed like they were on the same ground of strength. It was a tug of war that was more advantageous to the monster than to Wraith, who was struggling and trying not to get pushed back. Even at that, his leg drilled into the ground and shook as he tried to resist the force of the monster. The Fenrir also, using its hind limb, raised the floor repeatedly in an attempt to gather more momentum, which was effective. However, Wraith's tenacity began to vex the monster. It gnarled and gritted its teeth, drooling and pushing its head further, but Wraith held the monster's head tightly, pushing it back. "That I can't keep going like this." Wraith released his right hand, tilting his body to the left. The Fenrir, not being able to put an abrupt stop to its pushing force, rushed forward. Pow! Wraith dealt an uppercut into the monster's jaw, thrusting the monster's head upward with superhuman speed. The Fenrir staggered to the side and almost fell, but used both the forelimb and hind limb on one side of its body to support its entire weight. The monster regained its stability but stayed stunned for a few seconds before opening its eyes. Its eyes were filled with blood that had juggled into the sclera, red dot-colored blood mixed with drool dripping down the monster's jaw. "Oh ho! Are you feeling hot in the head?" Wraith said, giggling and flexing his arms joyously. "You are using skill, air leap," he flung into the air as the Fenrir lunged into him, flipping over the monster's head and landing on its back. He clobbered the monster with several punches on its neck, lowering the monster to its leg. "You are using skill, instant move." As Wraith's figure blurred forward, he grabbed the wolf's ear and with the ratio of the speed that he moved with, he tore off the monster's ear, slamming himself on the wall, but before he fell he used air leap to project his body higher and landed on the monster's back. Fenrir was trying to stand when Wraith landed the second time. The monster began a second round of stormy movement, throwing its body left and right, staggering, and slamming itself into the wall. Wraith held on tight and didn't let go no matter how much the monster ran around. "This time, it will be different." "Asshole," Wraith said as he clenched his fist, and "young man." He was about to thrust his fist into the monster's body but paused and looked toward where that familiar voice came from. Old Man Volmac. He was shocked to see Volmac in this place. How did he even get here? Wraith wondered but didn't have any time to spare to his thoughts as the wolf ran again, slamming its back to the wall. Catch! The man shouted, throwing a sword into the air. The sword swirled and slipped into Wraith's hand as he raised it. Right in that neck area, Wraith pierced the sword into the monster. And pushed it in so deep that the cross guard was what didn't let the sword fall into the wolf's neck. The blade of the sword protruded from the other side of the neck that was connected to its chest and limbs. A rain of blood baptized the rocky ground as the wolf came to its knee. Chapter 47 You freed the Fenrir. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You have killed the Fenrir, you will be rewarded for your failure and death, you have gained +5 stat points, you have gained item Fenrir's dagger. Wraith paused. He looked under the messages that piled up in front of him, he checked the back too. Is this playing? There was something that he was supposed to be rewarded for the moment he killed Fenrir. It was a trial of the Fenrir after all. So why is it not coming? Why is the message that I have unlocked the Shadow Lord attribute not coming? Is the abyss teasing me? Wraith cocked his head and he still kept glancing below the pile of messages that floated in front of him. And the rewards are not even encouraging. TSK, Wraith clicked his tongue. You have not discovered your true name, the attribute can only awaken when you discover your true name. The hell isn't that supposed to be Raven Wraith? Wrong, fuck you, wrong, no, I meant fuck you. Wraith heaved a sigh at the silence of the system and looked down at the lifeless body of the monster he died twice to kill but wasn't rewarded as due. I was rewarded for my death and failures. Wraith sat down on the body of the Fenrir and crossed his leg. Now that he is actually thinking about it, he takes note of the fact that he didn't level up when he killed the Fenrir, he only leveled up when he died. In that way, it kind of makes sense that he is the chosen hero of the Archon of Failure and Death. Heroes from the Archon of Light get stronger in light. Heroes from the Archon of Justice get stronger when they stand for just purposes. Heroes of the Archon of Elements get stronger when they are around natural elements, depending on which one they are found with. Heroes of the Sword Archon will only see progress and true strength if they follow the path of the sword. Heroes of the Spear Archon too. Heroes of the Throne Archon are the most mysterious and always are bound to be the strongest heroes because the Throne Archon is the strongest of all 9. They have ample skills which are based on having authority over certain concepts such as speed and more. Heroes of the Hound Archon are mostly useful for scouting purposes. They are some of them that have commendable prowess and are high rankers. They get stronger by following the path of perception and scouting. Heroes of the Shield Archon are defense types and mostly get stronger by following their path. Hence it was only natural that the only hero of the Death and Failure Archon, and sometimes known as the Darkness Archon, should gain strength by following the path of darkness, death, and failure. Just why have I never thought of this? Wraith scratched his head in frustration as he realized that he was supposed to get used to dying and dying and dying. It wasn't a good feeling to anticipate. At this rate, he just may build a resistance to all forms of dying that there is. He looked down at the corpse of the big black wolf. Can't let this go to waste now, can I? He stood up and pulled out the sword. Blood seemed down the tip of the blade coloring the black fur of the monster. Wraith looked at the blade and closed his eyes. He had long overcome his fears of death. Suicide cannot cause him to really die now, can it? If this goes well, Devourer will activate and swallow the Fenrir, then I will gain my sweet stat. I bet I could gain like 30 stat points from this big bad wolf. Wraith grinned. What the hell is he doing? Volmak muttered from his vantage point, which was safe from all the crumbling and intense battle. Pierce. Keork. Hish. It's not enjoyable, Rare mumbled with blood pooling down his mouth as he crumbled to his knee and his head like the fall of a mighty general dropped. You have died, the abyss rewards acts of courage and selflessness, you killed yourself, the darkness within you has risen, level up. Level up. You have gained 8 stat points, you have gained a new title, I am suicidal, title effect. 50% raise in all your stat points when you are risking your life in battle. You have passed a hidden trial. The trial of uncertainty, percent hashtag percent hashtag percent hashtag percent hashtag carrot hashtag, now it happened just as Wraith predicted. His body blackened and spread all over the Fenrir, wrapping around the monster and getting smaller and smaller till it had consumed the Fenrir, then reverted to Wraith, who coughed himself to resurrection. He quickly stood to his knee and panting and coughing more and more. He remembered the devastating feeling as he drove that sword into his belly and it came out from his back, the pain of his intestine rupturing. Let's not do that again. His panting slowed down and finally came to an end. You have stored a new shadow ego. The stats. Wraith cocked his head and flipped his hands into the holographic message. Where is my fucking stats? Volmek's eyes widened the hell out due to shock and surprise as he saw what Wraith was truly capable of. The Fenrir. It disappeared, it went away in an instant. His eyeballs quivered as he tried to make sense of it. Step 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 step, he jacked out of it and quickly ran to Wraith. Young man. Come quick, let's leave this place, he yelled to Wraith, trying not to raise his voice too much because of the soldiers that were making their way to this place. Volmak. Volmak. Wait. Old man Volmak paused as he heard the voice. Wraith looked at him and looked back. They were about to find an escape route, and looking at the way this underground cave was built, they might not be able to escape unless they go through the route Volmak came in from. Which was also the same route the soldiers, the commander, and the lord of the castle took to reach here. Please, I didn't know anything about all this. I had no idea you were being held in captivity. The old man sighed and his shoulders relaxed. It's fine, my lord. All we seek is to leave. Can you allow that? Sir Volmak, I respect you a lot, no doubt. But if the demons find out you released the Fenrir, not just my head will roll off my neck, yours and that of every person you have ever loved, and you know this. He responded with a calm demeanor, walking closer to Volmak with his loose robe that displayed his chest. He looked like he had been busy with something when the quaking sent him out of his room. Volmak sighed and looked at Wraith, who was behind him, and looked back at the lord of the castle, whose beauty was defined by his slick and long black hair. You are right. But I ask you of one thing. Can you let this human go? Volmak pleaded. Anything for you, Volmak. Please give me some time. Volmak requested, and the lord nodded in response. He turned to Wraith. What is going on? I don't understand. Freed the Fenrir. You didn't free the Fenrir, I killed it. Shush. Volmak placed his fingers on Wraith's lips, triggering a pause. Given my strength and record, he thinks I freed the Fenrir, and that is plausible because the Fenrir's body is nowhere to be found. I also can't tell them that you killed him. We don't want them finding out about your powers and their link to the abyss. Even the greatest of demon lords will come for you. But this way, I can still fight for my life using my connections. You don't worry about me. Rather, I think it's time for you to go home. Volmak whispered to him. Home? No way, I don't want to go home, Volmak. Felfium is my home. Wraith's expression crumbled, his brows shifted upwards as his eyes began to gather tears. Come on, young man. These past few months I have spent with you have been the best of my life. And I am not going to die. You can also come back when things settle, you have the support of the abyss. The old man said, wiping away his tears. He removed the black ring that was in his hand and committed it to Wraith's hand. I was not able to teach you anything, but I will leave you my greatest companion. He has been with me most of my journey and I am sure he will be a great help. He said as he folded Wraith's hands together with the black ring. Wraith snuffed his running nose and nodded. Volmak patted his head and walked over to the lord. Please, can you help me escort him back to the gate so he can go back to his world? The lord looked at Volmak in a very sorrowful way. As one would look like a martyr on his way to getting martyred. The lord turned one of his soldiers. See to it that this human reaches the gate and goes over to Aelgard. He whispered to the soldier, pointing to Wraith, who stood there with shuddering shoulders and his disgusting nakedness subtly covered by the darkness of the cave. Chapter 48 I Miss You. Or Not. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This gate will lead you to your world, the soldier said, standing in front of a swirling blue wormhole gate which was contrary to what Wraith thought. This, he mumbled, looking at the gate in a disbelieving manner. Yes, this, the soldier responded with an affirmative tone. Even though both of them had the appearance of a human, only one of them truly was, and the other was a hater of the true one. Hence, the vibe between them all through the short journey was a pure display of arrogance by the latter. Wraith had been given simple clothing, a red tunic with closed sleeves and a waist jacket accompanied by black pants and a leather knee boot. Wraith looked at the gate and couldn't deny the resemblance. It looks just like a normal dungeon gate in the rut. He paused and continued his train of thought. That I'm going back to the rut. It's strange. I have no idea how much time has passed. He sighed and walked forward, entering the gate in a very cool way. Wraith's vision opened to various fields reaching for the horizons, only disappearing after rolling over the hills in the distance. Passing through the various fields ran a weed-ridden, cobblestone road. The road eventually arrived at an immense farmhouse overshadowed by several enormous oak trees. The farmhouse was beginning to show signs of weathering, but it was still in good condition. The sky was bright and the wind was chilly but comforting to his skin. How shocking. Wraith had expected to arrive straight into his room where he was taken from. He showed no outrageous signs of surprise since he expected this scenario at the very least. Now all he had to do was find his way out of this farm and into the city. At least, that was what he thought. You are in a field dungeon. Wraith was not oblivious to the fact that open fields exist in dungeons. So he didn't mistake it for a normal field in the rut where monsters could be found, and to better note, it said, Dungeon, Emergency Trial Generated, Trial of the Goblin King. This is a dungeon that flourishes with a colony of goblins. Take advantage of this opportunity to bud your power. Defeat 10 goblins, defeat 20 goblins, defeat 50 goblins, defeat 4 hobgoblins, defeat the Goblin King. This trial will not earn you rewards. Seek your path to strength in the bosom of failure and darkness. Success will spoil you but failure will mold you. The abyss will be watching. Wraith raised his head up, looking tired of everything from a second-person view. The bang of his hair covered his eyes, making it hard to tell what expression he was making, but the way his hand dangled lifelessly was as though he would drop to his knee soon. But the entire view of his demeanor changes the moment a naughty smile spread on his face. He swung his face straight. I will get stronger, and go back to Felfium. He shouted and ran into the fields. Thaw Sonata, how do you feel to be the center of discussion after you cleared one of the level 10 dungeons that plagued Nelgal Nation? Ah. Well, I can't say I feel one way or the other, but I just think I am glad that I believed in heroes of the nature archons when the world thought of no use for them. I honestly did not foresee this happening. I just wanted to create a safe space for others like myself. But as the saying goes, even the world rewards consistency. I am glad that we the Elemental Guild can render these services and save nations. And I am also using this medium to tell the government and people of Rigeria Republic that I am going to save them too. There you have it. Thaw Sonata, the uprising superhero of these troubling and disastrous times, has spoken. The next topic is about the Empire's victory, now that the Empire has cleared all the level 10 dungeons in their nation. We hope that they can lend a helping hand to other nations. What do you think, partner? The news report turned to a partner who was a man in a gray suit, seated next to Thaw Sonata on an arched table. Well, I honestly think so too. The Empire has always been the center of all nations because of its strength and age. But I really think what the world is not talking about is the death of Yao Jansi and the silence of the pontifices. Yao Jansi, a legend, was killed by a swarm of monsters. We don't know how, hell we don't even know if he is dead or alive. Hero Yao has always had an arrogant personality, but still most of us looked up to him while growing up. Along with this retired hero. Aaron Yogalith, you must mean Aaron Yogalith. The suit guy responded. Thaw Sanada smiled and nodded before continuing. Both of them were the pinnacle of heroes and were constantly brawling for the position of the number one on the ranking board. They made our childhood. I must say it saddens me to hear that something like that happened to him. That is even one of the reasons I decided to accept Nigeria's offer, knowing very much how dangerous it will be. But I am assured of my victory. I have done this before and I can do this again. Look at you doing the same thing you hate in someone else. His friend and assistant guild master of the Elemental Guild Virgo Blackman said to him as they ended the interview. Well, I am different from that bastard and I never thought getting famous will be so much of a hassle. He replied, losing his tie and walking out with his assistant. Thaw. Virgo called his name with a serene tone. What? You sound like you are about to repeat that question. He responded even though they were still walking and had reached outside the building with their car parked in front and waiting for them. After they had both entered the car, Virgo began to speak. The level of difficulty of the dungeon in Nigeria, it is possible that it might be above level 10. Just like Hero Pedis warned us. My response remains the same, Virgo. It is obvious this guy is hating. People can bear to see their juniors prosper. I will go to that guild and clear it, just like I cleared the two before now. After that will you clear the remaining one in Nelgal? I know you declined because it is a water-type dungeon. In a dungeon like that your ability will be rendered useless. Thaw's expression crumpled and he did not respond to Virgo. That was their last discussion until the car sped off on the hire to whatever location they were going towards. Young lady, you are here again. Mr. Fatty said to the blonde-haired girl that walked into the motel reception. Yes, is he back? No, seeing how you have been frequenting this place, I presume that bastard owes you a lot of money, right? Because there's no way you'll be his girlfriend. No way, she responded with a sheepish giggle as the man kept spitting saliva with every statement. Then why do you keep coming? I just owe him an apology. Well, whatever it is, you can drop your number, I will make sure to call you when he comes. He said with a suspicious smile. Don't worry. I can just come back. Amber Rose said with tightly closed eyes, pleading with her mind to forget that unhealthy smile she just saw. Well, suit yourself. The man said, acting like he wasn't intending to spam her with calls and texts if she had dropped her number. She turned away disappointingly and walked her way out of the slum and into a car waiting for her. By resemblance alone, the car was looking like a Maybach, but the logo was that of a crane. So, there was probably a distinct difference. She looked back at the slum with a sad countenance as the car drove away. You have killed one goblin. Hunting has been made easier thanks to this dagger. Wraith praised the black obsidian dagger with crimson hilt after splitting the goblin's face with it. Is that the monsters in the rut are too weak or I am just too strong? How am I supposed to get stronger if these monsters keep dying in one go? Wraith expressed his frustration as he threaded his path deeper into the forest. His last fight was with Fenrir. Even before now all his fights he had always been at the weaker spot, a spot where he is the one that has to struggle to protect his life. This feeling of superiority in easily defeating monsters was strange to him and in truth was not enjoyable. Wham! He staggered forward as the goblin jumped down from a tree, smashing his head with a club. With a pause in everything, his movement and that of the goblin's blood dripped down his temple and forehead. Heek! The goblin suddenly jolted and stepped back as it looked at him. Its eyeballs began to shiver with a pale face, and the monster's shoulder trembled to its hand with every drop of blood that fell from Wraith's face. Title effect intimidation is in use, weaker target will be inflicted with fear, boo. Whelp, the goblin yelped and ran away, falling and picking itself up while discarding its weapon. Oh, did that scare it? I guess. Wraith swung his dagger playfully as he continued deeper into the forest. Chapter 49 The Goblin Massacre, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wraith's dagger drew a thin line from his initial position past the 3 goblins that stood in front of him. Their head fell to the ground one after the other. Does the sharpness of this dagger increase with speed? I don't know. Wraith summoned the item details. Item details, Fenrir's dagger. Attack power. 1607 grade. B durability. 700 when in the hands of a very fast person. The sharpness of this dagger is doubled due to the obsidian metal. Impressive. Wraith looked at the path in front of him, which ended with the open cavity of the cave beyond. A cave, it was cringe to think about, but Wraith honestly hoped that his death will be waiting for him in this place as he nonchalantly marched into the cave as complained, having not received a single reward since he started hunting the goblins. He drew a horizontal curve toward his side as a goblin popped out of the dark side of the cave. What started slowly instantly became a charade of seeming lines that slowly disappeared after the dagger had cleaved the goblins in the targeted area. Wraith's movement was random and guided by his transcendent sense. He suddenly stopped and rolled his upper body to his right side, slamming a high kick into the face of the goblin that jumped down from a dark high corner. The goblin flew into the wall of the caves and fell to the ground, leaving an art of it splattered purple blood on the wall. My status, hero status, name. Raven Wraith. True name. Unknown class. Child of Death. HP .4000/4000H. 21 level. 04 aura points, A.P. 00 shadow points, S.P. 71, locked, cosmotic points, C.P. 125 title. Celestia Slayer, one who devours death, chosen by the claws of failure, destined for damnation. I do not fear death, I am suicidal. Dust attributes, traits. The darkness beyond death, the dissatisfaction failure brings. Shadow Lord, locked, skills. Passive. Devourer, EX, LV4. Transcendent Sense, S, LV14. Intimidation, S, LV7. Heat Resistance, S, LV2. Poison Resistance, R, LV1. Skills active, Truth Seeker, S, LV1. Lava Ration, A, LV6. Instant Move, B, LV4. Air Leap, C, LV5. Black Armor, D, LV1. Way of the Sword, SSS, LV1. Incomplete, stats. Strength. 71. Speed. 48. Stamina. 50. Intelligence. 130. Endurance. 79. Will. 12 available stat points. 12. It changed again. Is it because I'm in a gate that is in another realm? Anyways, let's see this skill details. Way of the Sword, SSS, LV1, an incomplete skill from certain scriptures. This skill perfectly enhances the user's affinity and dexterity with the sword to the bare maximum. It is a swordsmanship that counters and finds an opening no matter how tight, but the skill is incomplete and in a premature form. Energy points cost. 10 cosmotic or shadow energy per minute. 5 aura per second. Amusing, it is rather sad that I don't have a blade. Imagining using this with the perfection of my transcendent sense. Wraith rubbed his chin. He rolled his sleeve and tucked his dagger into his inventory. Pow pow pow, he began to pummel the goblins with punches. It was not going to earn him anything, but for a moment he liked the sense of total superiority, although it soon bored him. Wraith's abnormal stat was a big contribution to how strong he is. If he was able to gain stat through defeating monsters like everybody or completing a quest from his Archon, but it was not so. All he needed to do was die, which raked in an abnormal flow of stat points for him. Meeting Thard, Harl was a foundational boost to his stat. And even sometimes he can't help but be grateful to his sparring partner. The truth is Wraith has been defeated more than he has ever defeated anyone. He stopped in front of the towering double door embedded within the cave walls. Body armor. Wraith looked at where the notification will usually appear at. Ah, my bad. Black armor, you are using skill. Black armor, your defense will increase by 100% for 1 minute. His skin began to turn black and thickened, up to his neck. Instant move. As his image blurred forward, he flew and smashed himself into the door, making a dramatic and grand entry. The cave was wide and open, and even he would not believe the number of goblins that existed in that cave. On the other end of the cave was seated a goblin bigger than the others, athletic and huge, with necklaces and ornaments that seemed to be from middle age. Beside the Goblin King are 4 other goblins with equal body structures but were not as big as the Goblin King. Wraith was still in mid-air. Anybody would have desperately wished they could put a stop to their movement at that moment but Wraith. You have deactivated skill, black armor. He grinned as he fell right into the middle of the crowd of goblins. Their numbers were almost 1,000. Hence began the beginning of the death Wraith sought. But it wasn't so enjoyable. His cry flew into the air as he fell amidst the goblins. They began to tear his skin with bare hands while some clobbered him with the clubs in their hand. It was a very rough and disgusting sight to behold. The goblins, after confirming his death, scattered around, leaving his body that has been carved open with his disgusting intestines on full display, with his eyes colored red and mouth wide open. You have died, you have been brutally murdered. Enduring pain and suffering, you embraced your reality. You have gained 100 stat points. Your endurance stats has increased by 10, due to the title effect of one who overcomes death. You will be revived, HP will be replenished, stamina will be replenished. Wraith rose from the dead with a joyful cry. A whopping 100. He cried. Death truly was not sweet, and not once has it been good, even when it was quick. But the rewards that followed made him so happy that he forgot the pain he had just gone through minutes ago. The goblins were already running towards him at this point, but instead of preparing to fight, Wraith lowered his legs and bent down. Air leap, Yaha. He screamed as he catapulted himself towards the lid of the cave, reaching a higher level than any of the monsters. You have equipped Fenrir's dagger. As his feet gently landed on the cave ceiling, instant move, when Wraith's body tore through the wind into the ground, causing a terrific explosion that released an expanse of dust. As the dust cleared, several goblins lay on the ground with their guts open. Wraith spun his blood dagger as he rose from his bent position after he had repeatedly stabbed the last one to death, bathing his face in the splatters of its blood. As the corner of his lips curved, his gaze met with the Goblin King. Wraith pointed his dagger forward to the Goblin King and brought the tip of the dagger to his gut, keeping his nasty grin and making sure his eyes were fixated on the Goblin King even though he raised his head to show the dagger on his neck. Uauquiaik. All the goblins began to scream upon the shout of the Goblin King. With a heightened vigor and spirit they charged at Wraith, who stood in the middle of the cave with his right leg on the goblin's head. Instant move, wham! As his body blurred once more into the distance beyond him, his leg squashed the goblin's head. Swish 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 swish. It will take years of experience on the field for anyone to swing a dagger the way Wraith did, yet somehow, just by sheer enjoyment and immersion, he was fighting as he had never, constantly shifting the dagger between his left and right hand in moments where the dagger was busy and could not switch to deal with enemies that were closing toward him. He plunged a blow into their face or jaw with his hand. His amateurishness could still be seen in his movement, but his superhuman speed and strength tremendously made up for it. And when the pressure got intense, air leap, whoosh, he was thrown into the hemisphere of the cave before they all could gather on him. However, whoop! Bam! One of the hobgoblins that had been monitoring him collided with him with a leap from where he stood. Crash! Both of them crashed through the protruded stone cones of the cave roof and on the wall, then down to the ground. The hobgoblin immediately grabbed Wraith and began to punch his face, not giving him space to breathe. In a moment his face had deformed, covered in blood he slowly lost the strength to breathe. You have died, fighting with your all yet being defeated, growth buds within your death and failure, you have gained 13 stats, the hobgoblin walked away from him with the other goblins cheering for its strength. The Goblin King grinned and leaned into his seat. Passive skill, Intimidation, has been activated, target has been stricken with fear. The goblin paused as Wraith whistled, leaning on the cave wall with his hands folded. TCH. 30 stats to speed, 30 points have been added to speed stat, 20 to strength, 20 points have been added to strength, 20 to stamina, 20 points have been added to stamina. Damn, I need 2 daggers, using only one is causing an imbalance, it's a different story if it was a sword. Wraith muttered to himself and put the dagger in his inventory. But since I'm using bare hands, should I just recklessly invest the rest of my points to strength? He asked the hobgoblin that stared at him. Dazed Wraith tilted his head sideways with a gaze that made the hobgoblin want to knee. The monster's leg slowly took one step back. 35 stats have been added to strength. Perks is what we call passive skill, don't blame the changes on me, blame it on the system updates. Chapter 50 The Goblin Massacre, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Like a madman, Wraith ran forward, his fist plummeted into the hobgoblin's head and came out from behind. Wraith's jaw dropped, even he was surprised at this level of strength. He removed his fist from the monster's head and was dazed at the hole he had created there. He looked at the monster as it dropped to the floor, lifeless. Then he turned his head back to the Goblin King. With a smile. You know the rest of the story. Okay, just to be sure we are on the same page, Wraith dashed into the crowd of goblins. This time his strategy was even more horrifying. He punched and kicked and punched and punched and punched. There were more punches than kicks. Every single fist he threw decapitated the goblins and he went on till he could go on no more. Your stamina is low, you are fatigued, Wraith bent and rested on his knee, panting. 2 of the hobgoblin leaped from the throne altar where they and the Goblin King stood. Landing gallantly in front of Wraith, they began to circle him. And as one moved, black armor thud. Just like the sound of their heavy landing, so was the sound that rang through the cave as the hobgoblin's fist collided with Wraith's chest. Wraith was standing at one point even though he was tired. Shit. His blow is packed. Wraith broke a sweat as he stood his ground using every bit of his last strength. He grabbed the hobgoblin's hand and forcefully turned it, turning the hobgoblin's shoulder like that. Bam! He smashed a blow into the hobgoblin's chest, the monster's body bounced on the floor, it coughed up blood, and even seemed to be having a hard time coughing because Wraith's fist had completely destroyed its lungs. Wraith walked forward and raised one leg as if he was about to start a brigade march. Then while looking into the eyes of the second hobgoblin, he thrust his foot into the monster's head, smashing it on the ground. I am sorry. My leg slipped. It didn't matter if the monsters understood him or not, it is clear he was trying to taunt them. Passive skill, Intimidation, has been activated, target has been stricken with fear. The last hobgoblin began to shakily move backward, as Wraith moved forward to it, it turned its back and made a run for the broken door. Swish! A thin curved line swiftly swept past the hobgoblin's neck. Never show your back to your enemy, Wraith helped with its last statement as it fell on its chest. He spun the dagger skillfully and turned to the Goblin King, pointing the dagger at it. You're next. You wake. The last hobgoblin beside the Goblin King groaned something and began to breathe angrily, it was the closest one in size to the king. And judging by that alone Wraith could tell it was the strongest of the 4. The hobgoblin leaped with a clenched fist into where Wraith was standing. I'm tired, he dealt with it the easy way. Wraith caught the hobgoblin by its neck. Lavaration, the monster's neck began to melt immediately. That left only the goblin kind to deal with. The Goblin King stood up and began tearing the ornament away from its neck. It didn't throw them away but rather walked forward to Wraith. Both of them stood against each other, and with how tall Wraith was, the Goblin King was still taller, almost looking like an orc but could be distinguished by its long ears and nose. Thud! The monster slammed both knees to the ground and offered the ornaments to Wraith with both hands, bowing its head. Is it begging for its life? Wraith was dazed. This was the first time he had seen or heard of something like this. You have achieved an impossible feat, you have gained a new title, the revered title effect. When you completely, overwhelmingly, 100% overpower a monster, it will respect and bow to you. You can do as you deem fit with the monster. Oh, so cool. Wraith chuckled brightly at the message that appeared in his front. Suddenly his stomach began to grumble. Passive skill, Devourer, has been activated. You have the tendency to devour anything, while I'm alive. Right before his eyes, he saw his stomach stretch forth, shifting colors and properties to a black and swiftly swallowing the Goblin King. It was as swift as when a frog sticks out its tongue to eat an insect. Wraith's jaw dropped. It was brief, but he saw it and began to doubt his humanity. Am I really human? You have swallowed a living creature, what do we make of this? The abyss slowly begins to question your origin. The living creature has been converted to a shadow ego has been stored in stomach. 3 out of 3 foot, the body of the creature exists in the abyss, it didn't give me any stats. Wraith looked like he was about to cry. But his face brightened up as a blue gate appeared in front of him. My ticket out of here. Wraith happily ran forward and into the gate. Aelgard. Human dimension, otherwise known to the natives as Earth. Few men could be seen on clusters in an abandoned construction site. They wore modern attires, but strapped to these attires were parts of armors. While one chose vambraces, another chose breastplate, which was common among these men that stood. One of them was even fully cladded in a heavy armor. The way his neck and small head snuck out of the armor showed that he had a small stature and was probably struggling to carry all that sparkling weight. With a buzz cut and a bright round eyes, he stood in front of the man in black suit and black shades that looked down at him and collected his license card. Name, Baek Min Ho. B rank. The man in black suit looked at the boy that stood in front with disbelief. A B rank. He doesn't even look like he's 18 yet.